The knife tore through the canvas, a ragged shriek swallowed by the wind, because staying inside was no longer an option. Not with that dot. Igor Dyatlov scrambled out first, gasping, the icy air a physical blow. Behind him, a tangle of limbs and terrified faces spilled from the jagged slit. Zina, Yuri, Luda, Sasha, Kolya, Rustam, Tybo, Semyon. They were barely clothed, some in socks, others barefoot, pulled from the warmth of their sleeping bags by a silent, unseen terror that had descended upon the tent on the slope of Kholat Syakhl. The wind was a living thing, tearing at them, stealing. Their breath and their thoughts, below the dark mass of the forest, promised some kind of shelter. They didn't hesitate, didn't grab supplies, didn't even zip their coats properly. They just ran, stumbled, slid down the steep snow-covered incline. Away from the tent, away from whatever horror had driven them to mutilate their only refuge. Snow bit at bare skin, sharp as needles. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the faint, shifting shapes of the drifts and the spectral glow of the snow itself. They fell, picked themselves up, called out names that were snatched away by the gale. Fear was a tangible weight in the air, heavier than the cold. They reached the edge of the cedar forest, a huddled, shivering mass. The wind was less brutal here, but the cold was still a predatory thing, seeking out exposed flesh. Someone, Rustam or Yuri, started hacking at branches with a small axe they'd somehow managed to bring. A fire, a desperate flickering hope against the overwhelming night. The fire struggled to catch, spitting and dying in the damp wood. They huddled around it, 9 figures silhouetted against the weak flames, their faces etched with a confusion that went beyond mere cold. What had happened? What had chased them? The mountain offered no answers, only the relentless wind and the deepening chill. 2 of them, Yuri Krivonishenko and Yuri Doroshenko, lay closest to the fire, their clothes minimal, their bodies already succumbing. The others, driven by a primal instinct for survival, or perhaps a desperate plan, began to move. Some tried to climb back towards the tent, perhaps for warmer clothes, perhaps to understand. Igor, Zina, Rustam. The slope was a cruel ascent in the dark, the snow deep, their strength failing. They wouldn't make it. Their bodies would be found later, spread out along the path back, collapsed in the snow, facing the direction of the tent they'd fled. Others, Luda, Tybo, Semyon, Sasha, Kolya, moved deeper into the ravine, seeking more shelter, perhaps a better place to build a fire, or maybe just trying to escape the open slope. They would find a den, a small hollow, and try to reinforce it with branches. They would take clothes from the dead, a grim necessity. But the cold, the injuries some of them carried, fractured skulls. Crushed chests would find them even there. The fire at the cedar tree dwindled and died. The wind continued its mournful howl over Kholat Syakhl, the mountain of the dead. 9 souls, driven from their tent by an unknown force. Scattered across the frozen landscape, their final moments a testament to terror and struggle against an adversary that left no tracks, offered no explanation, and left behind only a chilling, enduring mystery. The mountain held its secrets close. Buried deep beneath the snow, the silence that followed the wind's lament was broken only by the crunch of snow. Under the boots of the search party, days after the alarm was raised, they reached the desolate slope of Kholat Syakhl. What they found was not a simple tragedy of exposure or avalanche. It was a scene that defied logic. A tableau of frozen horror arranged by an unseen hand. The tent stood, half collapsed, on a windswept ridge, but it wasn't torn from the outside by a gale. It was slashed open from within, a desperate, ragged escape route cut through the canvas. Inside, everything was orderly, food supplies untouched, boots neatly lined up, journals and cameras left behind as if their owners had vanished in an instant, abandoning the very gear essential for survival. In such a brutal environment, the implication was chilling. Whatever drove them out offered no time to prepare, no chance to gather even the most basic protection against the -30°C night following faint. Snow-blown tracks of bare or socked feet, leading away. From the tent and down towards the tree line, the searchers began their grim discovery. 2 bodies were found first, huddled near the remains of a small, pathetic fire under a cedar tree. Their hands and feet severely frostbitten. In their night clothes, The fire attempt suggested a desperate, futile bid for warmth. But why here, so far from the shelter of the tent, and why so ill-equipped? More bodies were located further up the slope, scattered between the cedar and the tent. These individuals seemed to have died attempting to return, collapsing in the snow. Some partially clothed in garments, seemingly shared or stripped from others. Yet the most disturbing discoveries came months later, when the spring thaw allowed access to a ravine deeper in the woods. Here, buried under meters of snow, were the remaining 4 members of the group. Their state was profoundly unsettling. While there were no external signs of struggle or attack on most bodies, no defensive wounds, no clear evidence of a fight, the internal damage was horrific. Several had fractured ribs, one a severely fractured skull, yet the skin above these breaks was unbroken. One woman was found with missing eyes and tongue, a detail so gruesome and inexplicable it sent shivers through the hardened investigators. The bodies exhibited strange, unnatural discoloration, an orange-purple hue that no one could account for, and later tests revealed traces of radiation on some of their clothing. The official explanation struggled to form. An unknown compelling force, the final report vaguely concluded. But what force? There were no tracks of anyone or anything else on the mountain. No signs of an animal attack that could inflict such injuries and cause such panic. No evidence of a human assailant, no footprints other than the victims, leading away from the tent. Whispers began to circulate. Local Mansi people spoke of ancient spirits, of the mountain's anger at being trespassed upon. Others spoke of secret military tests, strange lights seen in the sky around the time of the incident. The radiation traces fueled these theories, adding another layer of terrifying possibility. The evidence was a chaotic, contradictory puzzle. A tent cut from the inside, suggesting an internal panic, yet bodies found with injuries consistent with extreme external force. Victims fleeing into the deadly cold without clothes, yet some found with radiation exposure. A scene of apparent terror and struggle, yet no sign of an attacker. Kholat Syakhl remained silent, its snow-covered slopes concealing the truth. The 9 souls had perished, leaving behind a trail of baffling clues and unanswered questions. A dark knot of fear and uncertainty that tightened with every new, inexplicable detail unearthed from the frozen ground. The mountain had claimed its dead, and the mystery of what happened on that terrible night had only just begun. The wind, a constant mournful keening across the vast white expanse, was the only sound that greeted the first official search parties. They arrived days later, their faces grim, their movements heavy with the knowledge of the 9 missing souls. The initial discovery of the abandoned tent, half buried in snow on the slope of Syakhl, only deepened the chilling enigma. It wasn't merely collapsed, it was ripped open, a violent, desperate slash through the fabric, seemingly from the inside. Belongings were scattered within boots, coats, food, as if the inhabitants had fled in a sudden, unimaginable panic, leaving behind everything necessary for survival in the brutal cold. Following a faint trail of footprints leading downhill from the tent, the investigators found the first 2 bodies near the edge of a small forest, huddled by the remains of a pathetic, quickly extinguished fire. They were clad only in their underwear and socks, their exposed skin a ghastly blue-gray against the snow. The sheer illogic of their state of undress in temperatures plummeting below -20 degrees Celsius, -4 degrees Fahrenheit, was the first truly jarring note. Why abandon the tent, the only shelter, and strip down in such deadly cold? As more bodies were located over the following days and weeks, some scattered further down the slope, others found months later buried under meters of snow in a ravine. The puzzle pieces refused to fit. The clothing worn by some of the later victims was a disturbing jumble. A sweater belonging to one person on another, trousers swapped, a coat shared. It suggested a desperate, frantic attempt to redistribute warmth after the initial flight, but it didn't explain the flight itself. Then came the autopsies. The initial findings of hypothermia were expected, but they were far from the whole story. Several bodies bore injuries that defied simple explanation. Fractured ribs, severe internal trauma with little external bruising, even a crushed skull. Most horrifyingly, one woman was found with her tongue, eyes, and part of her lip missing, an act of mutilation that seemed impossible given the circumstances and the absence of animal tracks. Nearby whispers began among the investigators. There were hushed discussions about strange discoloration on some of the bodies, an unnatural orange-tan hue, and even reports of unusual radiation levels detected on some of the clothing fragments. The official line struggled to form coherent sentences around these facts. An avalanche, the tent wasn't buried deeply enough, and the footprints led away from the slope, not scattered by a snowslide. An attack by indigenous Mansi people. The Mansi were known to be peaceful, and there were no signs of struggle or other human tracks. Wild animals, the nature of the injuries, particularly the internal ones, and the specific mutilation, didn't align with animal attacks. The mountain remained silent, but the evidence screamed contradictions. A group of experienced hikers, in peak physical condition, fleeing their secure tent in the dead of night, cutting their way out, running barefoot, or in socks into sub-zero temperatures, only to suffer inexplicable internal injuries and strange mutilations. The official reports began to twist, attempting to force the square peg of the evidence into the round hole of conventional explanations. But for those who had seen the bodies, felt the chilling silence of the abandoned campsite, and grappled with the sheer, terrifying absurdity of the clues, the truth felt far more complex. Siakal held its breath, and the dark knot of fear tightened further around the hearts of the living. The mystery had not just begun, it was actively resisting understanding, pushing back with every new, horrifying detail unearthed from the frozen ground. The biting wind, a constant, unseen presence, seemed to carry whispers now, not of voices, but of the mountain's disapproval, of secrets best left buried under the permafrost. The investigators, a grim-faced assembly of soldiers, forensic specialists, and local guides, moved like automatons through the wreckage of the campsite. Each step crunched on the frozen snow, a sound amplified in the vast silence, a stark counterpoint to the screaming silence of the dead. The initial shock had given way to a cold, persistent dread. The frantic, almost suicidal tearing of the tent fabric from the inside, the barefoot flight into the deadly cold, the scattered, incomplete clothing, it all painted a picture of desperate, immediate terror. But the nature of that terror remained stubbornly, terrifyingly unknown. Then came the new details, each one a splinter driven deeper into the investigators' already frayed nerves. Near the edge of the clearing, where the snow was less disturbed by the initial search, a forensic technician knelt, his breath pluming in the frigid air. He pointed with a gloved finger to a tear in the canvas of one of the smaller tents, the one furthest from the fire pit. Unlike the ragged, violent slashes that marked the others, this cut was unnervingly precise, almost surgical. A clean line slicing through the heavy fabric as if by a razor. It was a deliberate act, not a panicked one, and it contradicted the narrative of a group fleeing in blind terror from outside the tent. Had something been inside, or had someone remained behind, performing this strange, meticulous vandalism, while their comrades fled further out, where the slope began its descent towards the ravine? The local guides, their faces etched with a fear that went beyond the professional, pointed to a series of impressions in the snow. They weren't clear footprints, not exactly, more like large, elongated depressions, as if something heavy had dragged itself, or perhaps moved on limbs that didn't articulate like human ones. They were spaced too far apart for a man walking, too irregular for a known animal, and they led away from the campsite, not towards it, disappearing into the deeper snowdrifts downslope. There were no return tracks. Whatever made them had gone, or perhaps was still out there. And then there was the object. Found clutched in the frozen hand of one of the victims discovered in the ravine, a young woman whose face was contorted in a silent scream. It was small, metallic, and utterly alien. Not a piece of equipment, not a personal item. Smooth, dark, and cold to the touch. Even through thick gloves, it seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. It bore no markings, no seams, nothing to suggest manufacture by human hands or known processes. It felt wrong, fundamentally wrong. Like a piece of the night sky had fallen and solidified. These new clues didn't illuminate the mystery. They twisted it into something darker, more complex. The precise cut suggested a chilling deliberation amidst chaos. The strange tracks hinted at a presence that defied identification, a silent, powerful entity moving through the snow. The object was a stark, tangible piece of the impossible, a relic from a terror that seemed to originate not from the world they knew, but from somewhere else entirely. The mountain Sieco loomed above them, its snow-covered slopes indifferent, ancient. The wind howled, but it offered no answers, only the chilling reminder of the vast, empty wilderness surrounding them. The dark knot of fear in their hearts tightened further. The mystery wasn't just resisting understanding. It was actively mocking their attempts, presenting them with fragments of a truth too strange, too horrifying to comprehend. The living stood amidst the dead, surrounded by silence and snow, and felt the cold breath of something unknown watching. From the peaks, the night was far from over. The archives are now sealed. The full truth may never be known, leaving only whispers and shadows in the pages of history. Some stories are best left buried.